Hey everyone, and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. Battle for Azeroth is in many ways Legion version 2. Now what do I mean by this? Well, Legion introduced a whole bunch of new systems that came together to create an endgame that felt rather different from the previous expansions. It seemed pretty damn apparent that this worked for Blizzard. BFA's systems are almost all clear progressions of Legion's experiments rather than being wholly new things, for the most part. So with that in mind, it's time to work out what is the difference between the two expansions, what direction is BFA going in, and how will they actually feel different to you when you actually get your hands on them. And we'll kick it off with the leveling process. One of Legion's big innovations was the leveling process, where the scaling would let you do any zone in any order that you wanted. Now, Legion shipped with 4 leveling zones, and at launch you probably had to complete 3 to 3.5 of them, depending on how many dungeon quests you did to cap your character. Well, in BFA, each faction has 3 leveling zones, but they are pretty darn big. I mean, just take a look at this video where I worked out that BFA is already, it's quite a bit larger than Legion. 2 full zones plus dungeons should be enough to hit max level, so the system is pretty much the same, but here's the key difference: the narrative works a bit better. So, for example, in Zuldazar, each of the 3 zones has a primary threat, but they all tie in quite well to the overarching threat of the continent, and this has the effect of making the narrative flow work out a lot better than in Legion. Each continent starts with your main point of contact NPC, pretty much giving you the lay of the land, telling you what's up, how it's all connected. In contrast to this, Legion narratively suffered from having its zones being so separate to each other that they didn't really come together to tell an overall story. So, leveling is pretty much the same as the Legion system, but it's executed far better. As for the zones themselves, look, I've covered this before. I think that Culturas succeeds in having more open, navigable zones that feel like real places and are really immersive, which is a big contrast to Legion's overly sort of dense zones. And as for Zuldazar, or Zandalar even, they're a little bit closer to the Legion design in their feel. So that's the actual leveling, but let's talk about narrative. Legion barely had a story. Really, Legion is a collection of short stories. The zones just aren't that narratively connected, and patch 7.2 was pretty much empty of narrative content bar the raid and some of the class campaign stuff. So far, BFA is doing a better job of tying its stories together. Now, we don't know where this expansion is going overall, but I think that it has the potential to be a lot narratively stronger than Legion based on the progression of the war campaign and just in general the sense that I'm getting from the content that I've played on beta. Now, questing a narrative is fine, but Endgame is where we are going to be for the longest period of time. The core drives of Endgame progression are essentially the same, and they really do follow much of the Legion template. However, there have been tweaks that actually do change the outcome a lot, even if the overall model is kind of similar. So you still have Mythic Plus and raids, and they exist in the same format that they do now. Sure, there will there's some keystone tweaks and stuff, but broadly, dungeons and raiding, it's a pretty similar experience to Legion. But the differences do come out in the specifics. So Legion's legendary system heavily leaned on random drops and bad luck protection. This means that the best way to do a legendary was just to do as much legendary drop eligible content as you could, because that would increase your bad luck protection. If you wanted a certain legendary, there was no way to really guarantee that. So people were doing their emissary quests to, get credit. They were getting loot credit for all the raid bosses, grinding out Mythic Plus, all in the hope of more legendaries, which was super important for the raiding population. Well, legendaries are not in Battle for Azeroth. Their replacement, Azerite gear, is going to be very important to your throughput, but it does drop from specific sources. This means that you can actually target Azerite gear specifically. This actually reduces the time requirement to get the most important bits of gear for your character by a massive amount, especially because, as an example in raid bosses, you will be able to specifically bonus roll on bosses that drop Azerite gear that you want. I really do think this is going to be a massive change from Legion, and certainly one that is for the better. This faster speed also does make it a bit more alt-friendly, which is a nice bonus. Now, on the topic of RNG, there is 0 RNG with Azerite gear. The traits are fixed, it doesn't operate like the Netherlight Crucible, and it also doesn't Titanforge. They also take the place of set gear, which, when you think about it, means that it does seem like the progression is a lot more player-directed. You're kind of out there hunting down specific bits of Azerite gear, in the same way we really do set gear, and you're just sort of free from the randomness, other than regular drop chances, of systems like legendaries from Legion. Of course, Azerite gear is useless without your Heart of Azeroth necklace. Getting artifact power levels up your necklace, that increases its item level and its stats, and when you look at your Azerite gear, you'll see that its traits are unlockable based on how many levels your necklace has. The more powerful bits of Azerite gear are going to have higher Heart of Azeroth level requirements to unlock their traits. So this means that leveling up your neck is super important over the expansion, just like how leveling your artifact was important in Legion. However, there's some differences. In Legion, AP came from items, and it was applied to your currently equipped weapon every you clicked on the item. You would have to split your efforts between all of the specs that you wanted to play, which was seen as being rather alt-unfriendly, at least at the start of Legion before the AP numbers became kind of insane. Battle for Azeroth successfully improves on this system in a few ways. First, you've only got the one Heart of Azeroth neck. Then artifact power is applied to it as soon as you pick up the item, so it doesn't clutter up your inventory, and it's a lot more friendly to multi-spec characters. This still leaves a concern though. In Legion, your artifact progression up until the 50th infinite rank was quite grueling, and since all that power was available from day one, there was a massive race to get there fast. This situation seems to be somewhat improved in BFA. Now, remember how I said that Azerite gear traits require a certain Heart of Azeroth level to unlock, and how that requirement increases for traits on the more powerful bits of Azerite gear? This means that the main power ceiling from the HOA system is kind of clamped by the best available gear in the game and the HOA requirement for it. This should manage how kind of infinitely players will grind. It also potentially has another good design benefit. So from what I understand, you're going to have consistent new choices as the expansion goes on, and Heart of Azeroth level progression that is keeping pace with the Heart of Azeroth requirements of your current Azerite gear. This should avoid the problem that Legion had, where your artifacts had loads of unlocks up front, but then it was just straight linear progression afterwards. Alright, let's talk about the catch-up system. So it seems to be roughly similar to Legion, so getting on pace with current players probably won't be a massive issue if you take a break or start a new alt. The way that these levels work also means that the Heart of Azeroth requirements will keep pace with the content that you do. So if you're a Mythic Raider, then yes, you will have higher level requirements to unlock the traits that you want. But then again, if you're running Mythic Raids, you're probably playing a bunch of WoW anyway, that should be okay. If you are, say, in normal raids or dungeons, then the Heart of Azeroth levels will be a bit more at pace with the content that you're playing. Now, the sources of Azerite power are also quite different, or at least effectively are different, so you still do get it from your quests and your treasures and your dungeon bosses and all the usual stuff, but a lot of it comes from island expeditions. Basically, the AP gains are weighted such that expeditions are the most efficient way to get AP. Now, I'll talk more about the actual content later, but essentially they are more replayable in nature, so farming out a bunch of those should be more replayable than doing 100 maw triple chest runs. Plus, you essentially get a bounty for your first few, I think of a day or a week, which means that up front you get a lot of efficient artifact power. So between the artifact power grinding systems and how the Heart of Azeroth's effective artifact level requirement is clamped by the top end of the Azerite gear that you have or are next getting, this means that the grind should be a bit more smoothed out, and aspects of the Legion just artifact system that people didn't like are toned down, while we have constant choice and progression that is being focused on with the new Azerite gear that we keep on getting. My only concern here is the Blizzard seem a bit confused with Azerite gear. They are essentially an external talent tree, and each bit of Azerite gear has a selection between different spec-specific traits. There isn't massive choice within a single bit of Azerite gear, and this system locks them down, effectively having them be spec-specific until you reforge them in town at a cost. So, like, look, let's not beat around the bush here. Blizzard want to gut class design out, they want to put it on gear so they can reward us with it, because they don't feel the game's progression systems are engaging enough, than, you know, if it's just higher numbers, they want more. So alright, that's fine, but if they're basically talents and gear, just let us swap them in the field. Their design intent is seemingly to have us running around with a few different head, chest, and shoulder pieces all in our bags, and that just seems really annoying, so there are still some issues here. Now, we then have Titan Forging. Blizzard have said that it is a bit more rare and a bit less powerful overall, and that de-emphasizes it. Further to this, Azerite gear does not Titan Forge. It will drop at an item level that is fixed based on the difficulty of the content that you are doing, just like a normal loot table back in the day before Throne of Thunder. It seems like this is a good move, especially keeping Azerite gear off Titan Forging. So overall, this very much is a Legion-inspired system, but the implementation of it is such that the key downsides of the Legion system are minimized, while the good aspects are emphasized for the most part. Okay, let's talk about content. That was a lot of talk about progression systems and stuff, and while progression is really important for driving players into content, Well, the actual content has to be good. Let's talk about that. Mythic Plus is, for all intents and purposes, the same thing. It's just applied to a new set of dungeons. As for raids, well, once again, they're following the Legion model. World content is also pretty much following the Legion model as well. You have emissary quests that incentivize doing quest content, and just a broadly similar setup with reputations. We still have a mission table and a war campaign, which is this expansion's equivalent of the Order Hall campaign. So far, it does seem to be better executed than the Legion equivalent, but then again, it would have to be. There are two unique ones, Alliance and Horde, rather than one for every class. Now, there are three new types of content. There's War Mode, Island Expeditions, and War Fronts. Let's cover War Fronts first. While these are focused on the main 20-player versus environment game mode, they are a part of a wider system. So while your faction has control of a war front, you'll have access to unique content in the War Front zone, including a world boss and some quests. At that time, the enemy faction is going to be handing in resources to fill up a progression bar. They'll get AP and rep for doing so. When their bar reaches 100%, the Warfront is active on the other side, allowing the enemy to queue up and do Warfronts. During this time, there's nothing that the sort of defending players can do. Then a few days later, the Warfront will have flipped sides. Now it will be your turn to contribute to the resource effort, and of course you'll get AP and rep in return for that, and the enemy will have access to the Warfront content like the world boss. Basically, this is going to be giving you something slightly different to do on a semi-regular basis. It's something to break up the pace of your week and give you some new rewards. It's not a massive overbearing part of the expansion, but it's something that can fill up a few hours a week with pretty good quality content. Overall, I think it's going to be quite good actually for just the general weekly pace of playing World of Warcraft. The next new feature is War Mode. It's a bit light currently, so you turn it on in Stormwind or Orgrimmar. If it's turned on, you get a 20% XP bonus or a reward bonus if you're max level, but it's probably going to just compensate for the fact that you will be slowed down by PvP combat. Now, if you get a kill streak, you'll get a damage buff, but you will be marked on the map for enemy players. And then there are crates which are dropped around the world, and there'll likely be a PvP skirmish to actually secure the crate, but that's an element of War Mode that's essentially aiming to create more dynamic PvP content in the world. If you opt into this system, then I think it could bring a lot more enjoyment to the world content, which really is something that can be rather mundane most of the time. Next up, Island Expeditions. They are a big new feature, and of these three, they're probably the one that you will be playing the most. Overall, I think these are excellently designed. The enemy AI is really cool, and the system is surprisingly replayable. All of the stuff that they've said, say about the enemy teams and the many different layouts, it's true, it feels great. I do have a big worry though, and that is that Mythic difficulty will be too easy, because if these are tuned too low, then none of the replayability, none of the differences matter. The replayability comes from the mechanical interactions, but if those interactions are neutered by being too easy, then the replayability will die. This system does not have a Legion analogy, but it will fill the role of artifact power grinding, so it essentially lessens the pressure on other types of content to offer a fun way to grind AP. Next, class design. Look, I'm going to do a full class design thing through the game. For the most part, the changes are not really going to be liked by Mythic Raiders, I would imagine. Most of the changes do not, however, impact the majority of players. The baseline version of most specs is kind of just Legion, but made to work without the artifact. Everyone has lost some sort of utility, but that's such that your strengths are more unique. You might have fewer tools, but because everyone has fewer tools, the team that sort of needs to actually work together a bit more. It's hard to tell if this is a good move right now, but it does open up more team play going forward, and that is kind of harkening back to some older designs for the game, because back in vanilla TBC Wrath, each individual character was less of a superhero, and that meant that you did need to lean on your teammates a little bit more. But of course, that ties into a larger discussion about what direction they go with raid design, so it really is about whether they use that opportunity. So that's really running through a lot of the content of this expansion. I want to talk about the end result of all of this. So the end result is that the main issues with AP in Legion are significantly diminished. The same thing goes for the gearing up process in Legion. Battle for Azeroth, when you look at it at a first glance, it's very similar. However, the implications of its changes are such that the main pain points of Legion gameplay are gone, and the main positives from Legion are enhanced. Legion was often quite blunt with how its ideas were implemented. BFA still does have some strange decisions, but overall it does manage to provide a more refined design. So there you go. BFA really is Legion 2.0 in many ways, and I think for the most part, it's actually a good thing. They're doubling down on the strengths of the Legion model. I think that's a good idea, especially since Legos have been thrown in the bin, thankfully. Players who like Legion, I think, will be happy with BFA broadly, and players who had specific annoyances with some of Legion's systems actually stand a better chance of liking BFA. For me, Legion caused instant apathy with its progression system, and combined with my IRL stuff getting busy, I just stopped caring about gearing and progression completely. BFA, from my perspective and the things that annoyed me about Legion, does seem to be a significant upgrade. As for your day-to-day gameplay, well, you are going to want to clear a pretty high Mythic Plus every week because you'll want that Mythic Plus chest, especially because it'll have a good chance of having some juicy Azeroth gear in it. You'll probably also want to, you'll want to do your reps at the start, so doing your world quests. You are going to want to generally just do Mythic Plus to get some gear. You will want to clear your raids, really quite similar to Legion with the dungeon and raid content. I think the only difference is that you will have a pace of gameplay that is sort of shaped by the warfronts if you choose to engage them, which pretty much just means, for a lot of you, you'll do the actual warfront queued thing a few times and then you'll get bored of it, and then really, whenever the warfront sort of takes over, you'll fly over there, do a few quests and kill the world boss and maybe bonus roll it or whatever. But for the broad thing, it's pretty similar with the annoyances reduced, and perhaps instead of grinding out triple chest mods or grinding out world quests for artifact power, instead they have a new system that's specifically for that has many different maps and a design for replayability. But of course, as I covered, I am a little bit worried that it will be undertuned for the players who really do care about grinding lots of AP, because that's the thing, if you care a lot about grinding AP, you're probably pretty good at the game, so I'm a little concerned that the Mythic won't be hard enough. But there you go, that's essentially my thoughts on how BFA and Legion are similar but different, the good and the bad. It mostly does seem good from my current position, but of course, that is something that will be evolving as the expansion itself evolves. Let me know what you think about all these systems down in the comments. A massive thank you to everyone over on Patreon, where you can check out our awesome new poster of the month. They finally arrived and we're very happy with how they are in person, so you can check that out. Massive thank you to you for watching this video, and I will see you next time.